Yeah, great.
Thank you so much. What a great intro. And a great picture there. I like that. Well, thanks so much for having me down here. As you mentioned, I came in from San Francisco last night, and that was the birthplace of your company. It's interesting to see that entrepreneurial kind of DNA coming out of the Bay Area, both in your firm and also in a lot of what's happening, and I'm going to talk to you about today. Thanks for having me here. Now, Matt gave a great big picture of your firm. In fact, I learned a ton. I mean, looked back in the history, kind of talked about the present challenges, looked into the future. It was all inward looking, and for good reason, and I think it was a great kickoff to this conference, or this rally, I should say. But they've asked me to actually turn the lens outward, because you're operating in a world, as he made some allusion to, a very complex, changing world. And I would say that is absolutely the truth. But I see it, actually, a lot of these changes is largely positive. I'm going to talk to you today in my talk here on the Great Progression. We're going to talk about really what could actually or will actually evolve in the next 10 to 25 years. We're going to look at some technologies. We're going to look at some big trends that are happening. We're going to look at all the kind of ways that the world is going to change and that your firm is going to have to navigate and operate within. And what I'm actually going to spin this on you is that it's going to, I think, from my point of view, it's actually a largely positive thing. Far from the gloom and doom that you've basically been getting through the media, we're actually in really an extraordinary moment in history right now, and actually a lot of what's opening up is going to be very, very positive. Now, before I jump into the bigger picture of what the Great Progression is, I think I'm just going to, I got to start with the breaking news. I just came from San Francisco. It is unbelievable what's going on now out there right now, and we're hearing so much in the last 9 months to a year here about AI. And I will just want to drive home to you to kind of start with the kind of obvious here. There's a lot of the big picture stuff I'm going to talk to you about the next 25 years. This last year is showing how urgently and how fast this is actually changing. And that is, in fact, that we are going through a fundamental step change in human capability through AI. I use the word age here very deliberately, meaning an age is essentially when humans get a kind of a new capacity, a new technology that essentially gives them superpowers that they never had before. So we say with the Bronze Age, you know, once you get to the Bronze Age, you don't go back to sticks and stones, you stick with metals and go forward. We're in one of those situations now with the AI age. We are now entering a period of intelligent, the humans will work with intelligent machines. And that is going to happen now for centuries. And we couldn't do any, machines were dumb up until just recently, and now they're intelligent, and we're going to live with them for the next few centuries going on, forever, basically. And that's a very big deal. Why now? It's actually, it's interesting, as you've heard a lot about this generative AI. Generative AI is just, think of it as the interface, essentially, to AI. AI has been developed through governments and big companies, and Google search, for example, for 20 years, we've understood, wow, what AI could do to give you, search the entire internet in a second, get an answer back, something humans couldn't do. But this is a different animal. This is essentially giving it, letting the data speak to anyone and let you talk directly to the AI in ways that before you had to have legions of coders and very highly paid data scientists, and you had to focus on a particular one thing that you could do with your AI. Now it's a generic, general purpose almost technology, and I'll get to that in a second, that essentially allows everyone in this room to actually start to interact with everybody in your company, everybody outside, and everybody in the world, which is what's kind of led to this explosion of innovation that's happening. And again, where is it happening? In San Francisco. You know, it's always kind of fun. I've been in San Francisco for 30 years now, from the early days of the digital revolution. And San Francisco's a boom-bust town. And when the last thing is kind of crested and is kind of going down, a lot of the East Coast journalists and the kind of financial types and everything, they kind of leave the city and they say, oh, it's all over. It's, oh, San Francisco's done. Oh, everyone's leaving and stuff. And that's exactly when the whole next new thing happens. And that's totally true with this AI thing. The last 5 years has been unbelievably interesting time in San Francisco. And it's only in the last year with the OpenAI, which is a startup that kind of broke open what was everyone else had been developing behind closed doors, that essentially everyone realized, oh my God. And so we've got another gold rush going, folks. I mean, I'm telling you, Kids are quitting MIT and moving. We got people from all over the world coming for these hackathons. They're overstaying their visas. There's houses there with a dozen kids sleeping on couches. It's just kind of every night, parties and meetings and meetups and everything. It is an amazing, and money just flowing through the place again. So again, we're back in another kind of a boom stage here, which I'll tell a little bit more about that later. I personally, in fact, actually connected me through this, or came to one of these events. I've been holding a series of events in San Francisco with some of the leading thinkers in the world on this. And it's an elite invite only, 250 people to an event, and I get about a dozen of the most remarkable ones, do a little 5-minute talks. And we've done several of them. We did one in the early part of the summer. I was looking at the implications of AI, like what really is going on with this technology? How big a deal is this? And I do want to just share with you that it's a very big deal. It's probably the biggest deal. It's probably bigger than the internet. It's probably the biggest technological development that any of us are going to go through in our lifetimes. And this is a guy who's co-founder of Google Brain Team. I had him here, who's fantastic. And just to put it in perspective, he says, I feel that there hasn't been a moment that I've been alive where there's been a larger space of possibilities that have just come up over the horizon than have come up in the last year or so. He goes on to all kinds of amazing things that he can do there inside Google. This is Michelle Lee, who, besides many things, had run the patent office, but also had been a top person at Web and Amazon on their machine learning. And she even said, this is before ChatGPT, she said, even before the announcement of ChatGPT back in November of last year, I was a believer that artificial intelligence is the most transformative technology of our generation. And so she's kind of confirmed, and she's coming again from the patent office, who's been overseeing all kinds of things in that world, and so she knows what's innovation. And this one is the one that really struck me. This is a guy, Jerry Kaplan really was the first person to found an AI company back in kind of, let's say, the early 80s, funny enough. And he's also one of the guys that basically invented the tablet before the iPad and all that kind of stuff. But he said this, he said, the truth is generative AI is going to be much more important than any other invention. He had been talking about other big inventions. It might be the most important human invention ever. I'm genuinely, seriously grateful to live to see this moment. I had never expected to see this in my life. This is a common statement I've heard from many people, and again, I've been in the Valley for 30 years. Many people thought we'd never hit this in our lifetimes, but that this would be something that in a century or something we'd figure this out. But it's been an amazing breakthrough in the last about the last decade here, which if you really get into it. Now, I've also talked, had another event which was all about the positive possibilities of this. Because there's a lot of kind of negative spin, and everyone's like, freaking out about this thing. And so we brought together a similar group, 250 amazing invite-only folks, a dozen of them to kind of talk about what's interesting. Peter Schwartz is one of the great futurists of our time, but he's also the chief futures officer for Salesforce. He mentioned it, he kind of pointed out just one of these aspects about existence, basically. He said, how many of you have an executive assistant? I have 2. This is typical Peter. I've known Peter forever. He's basically a mentor of mine. He said, they handle complexity for me. The world has become very, very complex, and a very good executive assistant solves all that so you can focus on the things that really matter. And that's what we will have very shortly. And by very shortly, I don't mean years, I mean now. Meaning everybody, and this is a common thing, in the next year to 2, basically all knowledge workers will have a very capable executive assistant that'll match what a lot of kind of human executive assistants are. In fact, I've had actually 3 startups in my life. The first hire I always do is an executive assistant because it triples my productivity, and that's essentially what's going to happen to all these knowledge workers. And this is kind of another guy, just give an example, a great economics historian, basically, but also came out with a great book recently here, Brad DeLong. And he put it in this he said, genuinely useful machine learning is a huge deal. Individuals in the American economy will soon see a huge productivity bonanza. The 20% of the American workforce who are knowledge workers will come close to doubling what they can do individually in and this is the next couple years. Now, economists are starting to recalibrate what could the growth of the entire economy go if we actually start punching up the productivity rates of all these workers. And it's not just going to be limited to knowledge workers. That's just the first frontier. But you're going to see this go through the whole economy. It's an extraordinary development that's actually upending many, many people's thoughts of what's happening. Now, there is worries about the actual risks. In fact, I had another gathering of that, same kind of deal. And Oh, sorry, I'm not going to go into that right now because I want to jump into the bigger picture, but we will touch on this a little bit later in the talk as I lay this out. There are risks. To my mind, they're manageable risks. Like every general purpose technology we've ever encountered, there's things that can be done bad about it. And on every one of those general purpose technologies, electricity, fire, all kinds of things, we figured out how to curb the worst and bring out the best. And that's what I'm certain we're going to be able to do with this. Now, what is the Great Progression? Now, in the meantime, I'm going to kind of lay out AI, as big a deal as that is, that's not the only big deal that's going on in the next 25 years. And so I'm going to bring it back to what I really think is an even bigger story of the next 25 years here, the Great Progression. Now, I'm going to tell you in a rapid, we're going to do it in about an hour here, and I'll get a little time for you to kind of interact. I'm going to try to tell you what's really going on, and I'm going to do a positive reframe. For all the gloom and doom out there, we're really missing the forest for the trees. So many positive things are happening and are going to drive even more positive change. I'm going to tell you what's probably coming in the next 10 years. I've got a really good track record on this. I'll lay out how that's so you got to listen to me later. I'm going to tell you what's possible to achieve in the next 25 years. And one of the things I'm going to tell you is how we can solve climate change. One of the great things that's driving the gloom and doom out there is this idea that we can't, we're just, oh my God, we'll never solve climate change. Not true. We're on our way to doing it. I'm going to make a case for that. But also other challenges that we kind of think we're just the world is mired in. I think we can get beyond that. I'm going to refer to time about what you can do, although I don't know your industry the way, with the precision that Matt and you guys know. But my firm, Reinvent Futures, I mentioned that we spend a lot of time with senior leaders, C-suites, boards, helping these people understand the next 10 years. Because I tell you, if you get early insight into these 4 questions, boom, gives you a strategic advantage. And that is kind of what we do for my company. So I'm going to pass some of that to you. Now, the way to understand what's going on here and this extraordinary juncture in history is it's not just about the technologies, but it's like we are in a moment where all the systems, all of us in this room have gotten used to a meta system that is made up of subsystems that have defined the last 40 years, which is all your careers up to now, has basically worked in a way that was largely we understood how it worked. One, we had this meta challenge of terrorism. If you thought about the last 40 years, from the point of view of the West, America and the West, that was our big challenge. Energy was 100% carbon. Transportation, internal combustion engine. Culture dominated by the baby boomers, the biggest generation in American history, in any history, European history too. Politics was largely conservative, well, mostly because the boomers actually were quite conservative, but also for a variety of other reasons we can get into. Economics was unleashing the power of the private sector, entrepreneurialism and things like that. Capitalism was all about shareholder value, period. Work was 100% physical, even knowledge work. Production was industrial, perfecting that for 200 years. Geopolitics was all focused on the Middle East. Why? Because we had to get the oil out of there. Why? To keep the whole flywheel going. So this whole system of systems is one we all kind of figured out, okay, this is how politicians understood how to deal with that, and the media understood how to explain that. Boom. That thing is essentially over. Not to be too dramatic, but essentially that is rapidly falling apart and causing problems, and we have to go. Now, what's extraordinary about this, and this is what people do not fully understand, is that in every one of these categories, we have a new system emerging that is gaining traction, getting more coherent, but it's just not understood fully by people out there. What we have now seen, for sure, our big meta challenge for the next 40 years is climate change. We are essentially, our energy, we're rapidly moving to clean. I'm going to show you some of those numbers. Transportation rapidly to electric. Culture is already being dominated by the millennials, the children of the boomers, and the biggest generation of American history period now. Politics, I would argue, we'll touch a little bit about this, but essentially I think we have to stay open to it being a more progressive politics, including more regulation, all kinds of higher tax rates, things that affect you guys. Economics is going to involve the public sector. You're already seeing it a lot more just since the pandemic, but also with climate. Capitalism is going to be much more concerned with all the stakeholders. Work is going to have this weird balance of virtual in there now, which essentially no one would have believed you 5 years ago. And then we had the pandemic, and boom, okay, I get how that works. Production is going to be more biological, and I'll get into that briefly. That's kind of synthetic biology or biological engineering is a new kind of opening of a whole field that we're perfecting now. Geopolitics is now shifting to Asia with the big populations of China and India. We need that for climate change, but also the rise of China has created a whole different shift in our geopolitics. That whole world is where we're heading. And we basically are in the middle here. We happen to be in the decade where this is all freaking confusing and like, what do I, and if you're rooted in this world, you think the world's falling apart and the world is ending. And if you're rooted in this, you're thinking, oh my God, what a great opportunity. But most people are totally confused and think the world's going to hell. They don't understand what's happening. So this is where I'm here to kind of help you understand and clarify what's really happening. Now, I wrote this piece called The Great Progression a year ago. You can just Google it. It was a 10,000 word piece, got a ton of attention because I was trying to explain this new world, that new world that is breathing life and how it is coming together and how we actually have enough now to understand where it's going in the next 25 years. And so that's this piece there. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the key pieces of this. But here's the key thing from a technology point of view. We are going through three world historic technology step changes. One is the AI thing I just mentioned to you. The second one is essentially the shift to clean energies, which is an extraordinary shift. And in the space of 25 years, the planet, we're going to go from one system of energy on the planet, carbon, to another system of energy, which is going to be clean. We've never gone through such an incredible shift and a fast shift in this. And the third one is essentially a world of bioengineering, starting with genetic engineering, biological engineering, what they call synthetic biology is another way people are starting to talk about it. It's the least developed. But all three of these are giving human beings literally a step change in our capabilities. They are essentially giving us powers, superpowers, that before this we could only have dreamed of. And because of that, we're essentially watching not three ages beginning. I mentioned this thing about the AI age. It's like the age of electricity. Once you start electricity, you don't go back and say, oh, let's forget about the electricity and go back to the old way of lighting homes and stuff. No, once you hit these step changes, all the innovation just takes taken off. We're in that one. I already made that case for that. We're in it now with clean energy. Once you get into clean energy, you're not going to go back to, to carbon energy. It'll never happen. Barring, disaster and some kind of, nuclear holocaust or something. And then this one is an interesting one. We are essentially, humans can now engineer living things, plants, materials, ourselves, and microorganisms. And this is the least understood out there in the public, but potentially the most transformative over the course of this century. And they're all happening now. There's startups in every one of these things, and they're all going gangbusters. And so you can see it in the Bay Area. You can't go anywhere without running into this kind of feeling of just, oh my God, we're in some crazy kind of boom here again. Tech booms, economic booms, and ultimately transformative booms. Now, you'd say, okay, why would I listen to this guy? Well, back in the 90s, I worked with the founders of Wired magazine. I wasn't a technical founder, but I ran the magazine in the heyday there in the 90s. And when we were just ground zero for everybody thinking about this stuff, in the mid-90s, I wrote this cover story with that Peter Schwartz, who was one of the great futurists of the world at the time, still is. And this went into the book, went into multiple languages, as Matt mentioned. But here's the point. In the mid-90s, people had no idea how a digital economy would work. They had no idea, like, okay, what's Amazon? How is that ever going to be a valuable company? They're selling books online. Who cares? It was just kind of like, people will never put their credit card on the internet. I remember that was when we had that wire go, no, the people will put their credit card on the internet, believe me. Anyhow, that was the level we were at. So, and the other thing is people didn't understand what globalization was going to do. The Soviet Union had collapsed, China was opening up to the market economy. We're like, okay, well, who cares? Okay, so we laid out this story of the next 25 years to basically took us to 2020. And ultimately, what we laid out at that time largely played out. Now, what also is interesting is we also did 10 things that could go wrong that would slow this down. All 10 have happened, by the way, and the internet goes nutty. This gets resurrected about every couple of years. Like, oh, look at, we said, there's probably going to be a pandemic, a global pandemic that's going to kill millions of people, with all this globalization. Boom, there we got it. We said, well, Russia probably is not going to stick with this open liberal system. It's probably going to go back to nationalism and maybe threaten Europe. Boom, there's Ukraine. And then we said, well, there's going to be a backlash against European integration. There's Brexit. Anyhow, but here's the thing. It didn't really stop these other forces that we had really been talking about. And so what we had said is these chips, are going to double in power every 2 years for 40 years. And in fact, they've done it now for 50 years. This is a logarithmic chart. You're all math types, so Usually I have to explain this to people, like, okay, this is like a skyscraper, like, you know, usually like a 60-story skyscraper if this is a real skyscraper. Anyhow, point being, it hit it. We've actually been doubling the power of these things every 2 years. It's just been an extraordinary thing. Power has gone up. Cost has gone down dramatically. In 1980, this is something just put in context, it cost $70,000 for a gigabyte. 1 gigabyte was $70,000 in 1980, you know, and it's now a penny, right? And every one of your phones has 200 of them, 200 gigabytes. This is what technology does, particularly digital technology. The growth of people on the internet. When we wrote the story in the mid-90s, there's 25 million Americans on the internet. Nobody else is on it. And by 2020, it was 60% of the planet, 4 billion people. It's now up to 5 billion people are on the planet, are connected. There's 8 billion people, there's still 3 billion to go. But anyhow, Apple was broke the month that cover story came out. They begged Steve Jobs to come back because they were 3 months from bankruptcy. And what happened? They became the first trillion-dollar company. There had never been a trillion-dollar company. And Apple became the first one. Basically, it wasn't just Apple. It's like 10 years before 2020, roughly, this was the commanding heights of the global economy. Basically, 3 oil companies, which has been dominating the 20th century, and basically that's a Chinese bank down there. 1 tech company because of the iPhone. Basically, by 2020, all the commanding heights, West Coast, basically Bay Area and Seattle, West Coast technology companies, all of them $1 trillion. I mean, Facebook was a little shy of it by that time, but basically, $1 trillion companies, boom. And so, and it wasn't just, you know, the tech sector. The whole GDP kept growing in the United States. That dip was just a pandemic, which we recovered from. China went from a knucklehead place of a trillion-dollar economy with 1.3 billion people to the world's second superpower, all in this period. And here, in the stock market thing, when we came out, the Dow was at 5,000 when this story came out, and technically it was published in 97. And, you know, we were thinking, you know, it's not out of the question that the Dow could get to 30,000, that kind of stuff. We were in a strange group of people that were saying it's possible. People thought we were insane. Well, what happened? It hit 30,000 by 2020. And so what I'm saying is you can actually use tools to understand the future and make some forward motion on this. And I'm going to throw some of these. I'm going to give you one example here, and I'm going to apply it to the ones that are breaking open all around us right now. And that is essentially something that is very common in Silicon Valley, and you probably, maybe a lot of you here probably appreciate this. You know, the technology adoption curve. Every successful technology goes through these adoptions. If you're not successful, you don't get through it. But ultimately, they all go. And here's the key, though. What is the tipping point? And this is what guys like me get paid a lot of money to basically help people understand. When does that, and Peter Diamandis is another guy like that. He's great at this. Is basically, where does it tip? Which ones are going to go for sure, and when do they tip? And why is the tipping point so important? Because before the tipping point, everybody thinks, this cell phone doesn't work, it's stupid. And then all of a sudden it starts working, you go, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing. And then the exponential growth happens and everyone thinks it's obvious, you know? So this happens all the time. The second thing that happens is the systems built around technologies. You'll have an old system, and just think about it in terms of your industry. There's an old way of doing your industry, there's an old way of doing, you know, accounting kind of stuff. And then there'll be a new technology, and you'll think, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. But, you know, no one's going to shift until you get enough people saying, oh, my God, this is so awesome. And then it goes, the paradigm shift. And then it's like, this is the taxi industry after Uber, you know? It's like, what the hell happened? But it also happens, well, you mentioned social trends. It also happens with social trends. So this is like, in terms of Me Too and social things like that. One way to treat women in the workplace, and then, wait a minute, that's not cool. Me Too, boom, this is Harvey Weinstein. I mean, it's basically, it happens very fast. And so in the futures business, you got to understand those shifts. Okay, well, one shift that's one of these takeoffs is climate change. It is going to define absolutely almost everything for 25 years here. So it'd be malpractice unless I laid out some of the basics here for you to think about. One is, and this is interesting, 10 years ago I would get debates on this. I have a hard time laying this out, but I don't know where everyone here is. But basically, we got to know the facts here because we're up against a big challenge here. So this is CO2 in the atmosphere, which is the heat-trapping CO2 in the atmosphere. Since the time of Jesus to basically the Industrial Revolution starts taking off. Why? We're digging up coal, we're putting it in the air. boom, this is the bad direction to go. It gets a lot worse than that. Because if you go back to where human beings, with our brains, Homo sapiens, our brains and our bodies, comes out about 300,000 to 250,000 years ago. We don't know exactly. Human beings have never been on the planet with this high of CO2 in the atmosphere. These are ice ages, by the way. We can do this through ice cores, all kinds of stuff. There's a natural rhythm to how the world does it through ice ages. This is totally off the charts. By the way, it can get a lot worse. It's just where the dinosaurs banged around, and the only thing that can live are cold-blooded lizards on the planet. But we're not going to go that far. But basically, the point is, we're in a bad place. And now, where has what's interesting is, since this industrial revolution, these are the regions that have contributed the CO2 up in the atmosphere, which hangs there forever, or almost ever. The US has basically put the most up over time because we were one of the earliest and the biggest economy. But China and these others have been punching it up lately, partly because they're going to coal. But what's interesting here, and I want to point this out, and I often do this, is the developed economies started flattening in about 1980, meaning we are not putting any more up there, even though we're growing these economies. So we know how to actually hold tight and ultimately even bring it down. And so what you're seeing in the COP meetings in the UN and all that is we're trying to figure out how do we not just crest, but drive it down. And these are different scenarios of how we could do that. So that's what's going to happen in the next 25 years. And it's going to structure all kinds of stuff. So you got to kind of understand that's happening. Now, luckily, the technologies to solve this are coming right online, right when we need them. And this is what's extraordinary. If you would have gone back 10 years ago, when I was talking, I've been in these talks like this for 25 years, and you would have said, oh, renewable energy is going to kind of take off by 2020. It's like, it's not going to happen. But that thing has happened. This is a tipped. There's no going back on this one. And I'll give you a quick shot on this, actually. One of the things happened, very similar to digital technologies, is essentially the cost of solar cells has come down dramatically in the last 40 years. If you go just from 1980, I love this 1980-2020 thing. But anyhow, it's come down, boom, about 100% basically since the early days of very expensive. Now, this is a more complicated one, but I want to show you this is because you guys are numbers people, so you kind of would get this. This is the cost of establishing a solar energy plant compared to a coal plant or a nuclear plant. This is the cost of what it would cost by megawatt hour end to end for the lifetime of the thing, not just installing it and what you pay, but basically how it has dropped dramatically. It's about 90% in 10 years. So now solar is absolutely cheaper than coal, and it is all over the world for market reasons. It's just going gangbusters all over the place because now the price point has gotten not just competitive, but cheaper than carbon energy. So we're watching the numbers taking off. This is still 2020. This, by the way, is now logarithmic growth. This is an interesting one where the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which is the U.S. kind of $350 billion into clean energy, this was what we thought we were going to be on to get 100% clean grid by 35. This is now with the investments, the stimulus to kind of shift people that direction. We think we can hit it now in ways that we didn't think. Private sector, so that's public money, but private sector money. Last year, $1.2 trillion of private sector money went into investments into clean energy. This is essentially solar, boom. This is auto industry. $350 billion of private sector money went into electric cars. And that's the hockey stick. It's going up. Now, this is an interesting one, too. From the 60s, this is, nuclear stalled for all the reasons we know. But, it's still a viable technology that's not, doesn't put CO2 in the air. But this is essentially the takeoff of non-hydro renewables. This is solar and wind. These are actual numbers global. It has now surpassed the contribution of nuclear. And which trajectory would you want to be on at this stage? Well, you want to be on this one, which is the digital one. That's the way it's taken off. And that's what we're at. And so that's why the private sector money is going everything else. Boom, it's tipped. Now, the auto industry one's even more interesting because it's moved so fast. In 5 years here, it's just been extraordinary. Why did that happen? Well, it happened because the cost of lithium-ion batteries Went from the 90s, it was this. Boom, went to that by 21. They dropped 100% in 30 years. You know, that's a cost drop. And so what's happened? Boom. Globally, we're about 10% of all new cars now are electric vehicles. The US, which is a laggard on this, I will say, we just crossed 5% last year. 5% is significant. Many technologies reach that tipping point at 5%. That's enough market penetration where enough people see the product and see how much better it is. Boom, it takes off. So I think we're in good shape there. The trajectory, though, looking out, Europe and China are already at 20% of all their new cars are at electric. By the way, California, where I'm coming from, is at 25%. California as its own, which is the 5th largest economy in the world, just California, they're at about 25. The rest of the US lagging here. But basically, we can see how it's probably gonna go off in the next 20 years. This is, we are gonna throttle back internal combustion engine. Every single automaker in the world is shifting to electricity. There's nobody making a credible case now to hold out on this. And once the net market tips, boom, it goes. So anyhow, interesting piece here. So economic long boom. Now, what I want to say about this is not only these technology booms, they're economic booms. They create new industries. They create new wealth. They create new jobs. They create all kinds of stuff, right? If you can't make money in a tech boom like this, you should go into academia. And you guys are all business people. But I'm just telling you, I mentioned we're in 3 of them. 3 huge tech booms. I just mentioned the clean energy one. But let's just get into, and I mentioned, but let's go a little deeper into AI and a little bit into bioengineering. Just give you a sense. So, and I know we're moving through a lot of things, but that's the whole idea here. Stretch your mind, give you a bunch of new thinking, help energize you for the next decade, or the next couple of days here. All right, so just go back to AI here a second. AI is a function of data. It's essentially, the more data you have, this is generative AI essentially, is just literally, well, it's a function of data. We had to digitize everything and we had to basically put it in the cloud to allow us to get to the point where AI could plow it through it and make sense of it. And here's what's crazy about the amount of data in the world. So folks here, I don't know how techie you are, everyone's kind of familiar with these kind of numbers. If you just keep adding zeros, we get into zettabytes and exabytes. So look at that. We are now in the world of zettabytes and exabytes. Now, let me just give you a sense of how crazy fast this is happening. If you go back to the beginning of human history, when we're banging the information on clay tablets 8,000 years ago, or 8,000 BC, 10,000 years ago, all the way till the year 2003, I guess it was, all human beings had come together, had come up with 5 exabytes of data. That was that one notch up, right? We are now doing that every 2 days, we're producing that. And we're essentially, the world's data is doubling every 2 years. And so again, it had to shrink this thing just to show you, oh, we keep going here, to get it to, we're about 60 zettabytes by 2020. I love that little thing. And I'm telling you, by 2025, we're looking at probably be at about 175 zettabytes. Again, that's that lower one here. Now, what essentially is happening is everything in the world is being digitized, everything's being captured, and everything now is available for AI to plumb. So this is the first big thing you have to understand. It's all that digital transformation last 10 years of everyone trying to everything in the cloud was a prerequisite for this. Now, what happened is there was a shift in approach to AI. We've been going down the wrong path of AI for literally since the 50s. And there was a rogue crew that had a thing called neural networks and large language models that had been ostracized forever. But essentially by this time, it was a breakthrough here, basically, in this period, where they figured out, oh my God, that's the way to go. That's what you call LLMs, large language models, neural networks. You hear these things now. And so corporates got early wind of that, and they started pouring money into it. So this is investment as a little kind of proxy for what's happening. Then OpenAI, which was a startup, even though Google and Facebook and Amazon, they'd all been doing this. But it took OpenAI to say, hell with it, we're going to put it out there, which they did. And boom, this has been the investment in startups now, gone through the roof. Now, where is the money going? It's going to basically California again. And I know this is people from all over the country here, but half of all Gen AI investment is going to California, and that really means the Bay Area. And there is something going around in various places, but anyhow, if you want to know what's happening, go to San Francisco right now. ChatGPT, the fastest takeoff ever. There are more people using ChatGPT than LinkedIn or Netflix or any of that now. And within 2 months, it had 200 million people. I mean, it's just this crazy number of people taking it. So we know it's like, okay, they're using it. Now, I'm just saying, and this affects you guys, anything, these are the prices of various things that humans, Americans want. Anything that has already been automated has been cheaper over the years here. Literally, cars are as cheap, they're better quality, but they're cheaper, as cheap today as they were 25 years ago. Anything that had to do with human intelligence, where we couldn't automate it, particularly higher education, medical care, all kinds of stuff, hasn't been able to be automated, has gotten super expensive, has gotten so expensive it's prohibitive. You can't have higher education numbers going up any further. You can't have much more in medical. But that's when AI comes in. Everything that has to do with this is going to start to get automated in different ways. So that's another way to think. And your industry too, there's going to be interesting things. So we'll get to that. Basically, I would say, think about it, it's going to augment most people. It's going to not even touch, these are kind of physical things like cleaning, maintenance and that stuff. That's not going to get affected for a while. That's red. Blue is they're going to get augmented, meaning much more productive. And the grays, this is Goldman Sachs, by the way. Yeah, Goldman Sachs. Lawyers are getting hit early, but serious displacement, and executive assistants, as I mentioned, are going to get hit fast here, too. That is true displacement. But this is not a total displacement of workers. That whole fear, not true. We're going to push humans up the food chain, up into higher problems. And your industry is an interesting early version of this, which is if you go back to the spreadsheet days, you guys all remember this, release of Lotus right here in the early 80s, and release of Excel. Everybody, this is how many bookkeepers, and everyone thought, oh my God, it's going to destroy the accounting world. Everybody, bookkeepers, and it's like, and at first, it did come down for those kind of folks, the entry, putting stuff in there. But look at what happened. These are essentially the financial people that took advantage of that, and there are now more jobs involved in your space than there ever was before. This is what technology does. It releases the dumb jobs to automation, and it puts the creative, innovative jobs to the human brains. And this is, you remember this. So just don't freak out about basically this next version of it, although it is going to affect. And particularly your billable hours thing, I would just suggest, is going to be an interesting one because it's going to make you guys a lot more productive, and you better figure out a way to charge people. So anyhow, I'm going to just touch a couple last things here. There are risks, and everybody goes, oh, the sky's falling. So I'm just going to throw out here a couple. These are the risks that I looked at with this group of 250 experts I brought together. And I don't have the time to go into all this, but I do want to just put them all up here fast and say a couple of things. Like, for one thing is, people think, oh my God, it's going to be super intelligence. It's going to run. They're going to, we'll be, like animals to them. That's not happening. I mean, that's, most people I talk about is just, it's ridiculous. If it ever happens, it's a century out or some crazy thing. So don't worry about that one. Some of these early ones, like hallucinations and biases, that's just getting worked out in the software. That'll be not even a problem in 2-3 years here. This is going to be a big one. We might have to fundamentally rethink copyright law. Anyhow, there's some interesting ways that the system might have to fundamentally change. There will be a lot of messiness in social media and all that stuff. I would argue there will be shifts, but not massive shifts. I mean, right now, everyone's trying to hire. Nobody has enough people. It's like, why are we worried about job losses? It's like, we need the machines. The robots have finally arrived right in time for us. I mean, it's like we need them for all the jobs openings that we got. Anyhow, the point is there are issues here, particularly security attacks. That's a big one. The extinction risks, there are bad apples who could do bad stuff with this. But again, it's something that in a piece I wrote about this, every general purpose technology can be used for bad stuff. Everyone can. And they are, Electricity, it's like, yeah, we can light our homes, we can kind of light the streets, we can kind of power radios and washing machines, awesome. But a kid sticks a fork in a socket and it gets electrocuted. Yeah, okay, great. It's not bad, or not great, that's bad. But it's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to shut down electricity? No, you figure out how to keep the kid by putting a little thing over the socket, you know, and like they can't put the fork in there. I mean, we figure out ways to deal with it. We regulate it, we kind of have inspections, we have a million things, right? Anyhow, the point is, we're in that phase of AI now. We can all see the problem, just haven't figured out all the solutions. I will mention this from this Greg Crowdo, again, founder of Google Brand. This guy, like top 12 people in the world, probably thinking about this stuff. And he says, he made a plea to us, which I think is worth saying, because we were talking about some of these negative things. You have to try. It would be insane to look at this kind of technology, this kind of opportunity, and say, well, I'm too scared. So he said, please try it. I've just passed it on to you, which I think is true. We have to go forward. Now, I'm going to shift here. Last little bioengineering here. It's probably not going to affect you guys as much, but I think you want to understand the world that's going on here, is bioengineering. So essentially what's happened in this same period, the last 25 years, has been extraordinary breakthroughs in our understanding of genetics. I mean, it took, in the early 2000s, it took $3 billion and 15 years to crack the first human genome. Now, essentially, by 2020, it costs $1,000. Anyone here could get it for $1,000. It's now going down to about $100, meaning your entire genome could be read for $100. This is incredible. This has fallen faster than the cost of computer chips. It's just been mind-blowing. So we understand genetics now like we never understood it before. The second thing is we now have a cheap, easy way to manipulate, to tweak the genome of anything, all living things. This is this thing called CRISPR. You probably have heard about this. Cheap, easy to do, so you can essentially engineer. Humans can engineer living things now. It's a huge breakthrough. We didn't even know what genes were in 1950, and now we can engineer them. And so what happened is that breakthrough in CRISPR happened about here. Investments started taking off after. I use these kind of as proxies for all this is funding startups that are going to come out this decade in this space. So what we've got now is a thing where synthetic humans engineer it biology. That's the era. When you hear that thing, it's a big deal. Now it can genetically engineer plants and animals to different kind of materials. It can bioengineer microorganisms to turn them into fuel or foods or all kinds of stuff. But it can also, it's about, our understanding of biology is so rich and deep right now, beyond genetics, proteomics and others, that we understand how biology works now in ways that we can synthetically drive biological processes, like meat. Let's give an example of that, which is meat, which is, you've probably heard this thing of cultured meat, or lab meat, a bunch of ways of talking about it, which is essentially you take the same, well, let me just get to this in a minute. The reason we're doing this thing with beef and meat is once we started this long boom of the last era, everybody who comes out of poverty and they get a little money in their hands, they want to eat meat. I mean, if you've been eating rice for your entire life, boy, you want chicken once it happens, once you get money. So basically everything all over the world this has happened. The problem is, just like there's not just clean energy, beef particularly is horrible on the environment. Methane, all kinds of stuff. So the way we create this meat, but pigs and chickens are better. But anyhow, still, this is a bad problem. We got to figure this out. And so there's this idea of cultured meat. So we think, okay, we take the cell from an animal, a cow, a fish, a chicken, and you put it in a vat, you give it all the amino acids and waters and all the kind of stuff that the cow would get roaming around chewing grass and, for its lifetime. But you do it in a super intense way, boom, 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 right there in the lab, and you create the same meat. It is meat. It's not like kind of meat. It's like, it's the cow. It's exactly that thing. Now this, you think of it as science fiction. It's already, the FDA has approved chicken that's being done this way. You can buy it now. So anyhow, this is a coming thing. So anyhow, one of the ideas that we're starting to think is, this is the Impossible Burger that's plants trying to look like me. But anyhow, you'll probably see a big buildup of cultured meat. You'll still have your nice slice of beef that probably tonight we're all going to have. But this will be McDonald's hamburgers. But anyhow, the point being is, we're going to see this shift in biological engineering into this kind of space. It's one example. Just keep an eye on that. Now, I'm just going to, Oh, okay, it's just one last thing here. I want to just go. One last thing on these three things. And this, oops, sorry. Oh, damn. I went a little fast in this. But let me give you this, because this is, you had Peter Diamandis, who I know Peter. It's abundance thing. This is where Peter's coming from, and that essentially I'm coming from too, which is new technologies essentially do many things. But one of the things they do is they dramatically drop the cost of things. And when they drop the cost of things, they make things more abundant. So things that rich people could only have, when it drives down the cost, everyone can have it. That's abundance. We want abundance. We want more people to have all kinds of things. As long as it's sustainable, as long as it's not blowing out the planet, as long as it's done in a biodegradable way. Anyhow, this is a way we can go. So here's what's interesting, is every one of these things, we're just starting to think through the abundance play of this stuff. So for example, AI. AI, weirdly, and I'm going to tell you briefly how it works with housing. But for example, one of the things that came out, I mentioned the executive assistants. Many people have been talking about how every student could have an individualized tutor. Everyone, K through 12, public schools, you name it, globally. Everyone would have a tutor, knew them, follows them, prods them, coaches them, and that could dramatically boost test scores all around the world. Anyhow, the point is, and then it's like, oh, it's not just the rich who can tutor and get, all this stuff. Okay, anyhow, you get the point of what I'm trying to do. The housing thing, I just want to say quick. It's a longer story. We don't have a ton of time here. But one other thing you got to remember, autonomous vehicles. That is coming in the next 25 years. By the way, we're in San Francisco. You can get taxis with this now. Although it's a little complicated. They're still working out the kinks. But the point is, in the next 25 years, I will tell you, there will be many, if not ubiquitous, autonomous vehicles. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that if you had shared autonomous vehicles, one of the problems with cities is a third of all cities in the world is dedicated to parking spaces. A third of all real estate in the world, in every city, all over the world. Meaning it's the side of the road, it's in your driveway, it's in your car, your company has to have it. Anyway, why? We only use it, you individually probably use your car 5% of the time, 95% of the time it's sitting there doing nothing. Now what's interesting is we start thinking, what if you just summoned a car, whatever car you want, when you want it, and you can jump in the driver's seat and drive it too. Could we share these things in ways that we could claw back a third of all cities for housing? Take the pressure off all this kind of crazy things. So your children will actually have houses, right? My daughter can't live in the Bay Area because there's just not enough housing, right? So anyhow, there's some interesting twists on how costs could come down in ways that we're not anticipating. Same thing with energy. And this one I want to just say, abundant energy is, once you get abundant energy, all kinds of stuff, like water desalinization, all kinds of stuff happens around climate change. And I want to point out this thing. I showed you how the renewables are happening. This is another thing that's really interesting. Now, this is not for sure, but in the next 25 years, probably. We're going to get to fusion energy. You've probably, I don't know if you've heard about this. Current nuclear energy is fission. We blow up an atom, it blows up, and we release energy. That's Oppenheimer, if you saw that movie, right? And it's dangerous, and it's bombs, and all kinds of stuff happens. And it does have waste and things like that. Fusion energy is what the stars do, the sun does. You take two atoms and you fuse them. And it releases more energy, but it has no waste, and it's actually safer for a bunch of reasons that are technical reasons we can go into. But the point being is, we are now crossing the threshold of experiments that we're getting more energy out of these experiments than we put in. And that's the key, is you have to get more energy out of what you put in. And so now we're crossing that threshold consistently. And there are a lot of startups now in this space, and there is possible, people are talking about 2030, we could have commercial fusion energy. If that happens over time, in your kid's lifetime, this could be crazy cheap, abundant energy, which can do all kinds of wild things with that. And the final thing I'll just say, in terms of this bioengineering piece, with AI, healthcare is so expensive now, that could be super cheap. This sounds weird. How could it be cheap? Well, here's the thing. If you knew everybody's genome, every individual's genome, and you have a digital doctor essentially monitoring it every day for cheap, for nothing, you could actually you could guide yourself through a much healthier life, avoiding all the pitfalls of all the stuff we do. It wouldn't be this disaster-laden kind of last, resort kind of thing we do at our basic it currently do in our medical system. Anyhow, there's a way we said, wouldn't that be weird if healthcare would be cheap? And it's actually not out of the question. So people are starting to contemplate this. Now, these are not for sures, but I want to kind of give you the tangibility that we're entering a period where things that we thought in the whole world were impossible are now possible because we have these superpowers from these 3 world historical tech developments. That's good news. Now I'm going to get to some complicated news, politics a little bit. We're not going to get into partisan politics, but I want to point out to you, for you folks, it's not just about technology. When people worry about the next 25 years and think about the next 25 years, they're worried about all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to touch on a few things outside of the tech space. And one is politics. And the reason I do this is your industry is going to be very affected by politics. And, oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to tell you guys is in those risks of AI, there's a lot of talk now that we might need a lot of auditing to actually audit these large language models and audit the use of these data and all this stuff. And it actually could create a crazy opening for new opportunities for your industry to actually help solve the risks of climate change. I forgot to put that in there, of essentially AI. But anyhow, this is another one where, for better or worse, whatever kind of government, federal government, state government's kind of decree, you're going to have to carry out. And so this is what I want to lay out to you, and I do this a lot with senior execs to kind of give them a sense of where the country's going. Generational change. This is the American population in 2020 by generation. And this is one thing to notice. The boomers are retiring and dying, just not put too fine a point on it. And the millennials are the biggest generation in the game. And many of the people here I know are Gen X's, and you're just not big enough to swing the boat too far, so you're holding the boat steady. So thank you for that. But if you roll this out to 2030, Gen Z is coming right behind the millennials. They are very aligned in values, in terms of the climate and all kinds of stuff, DEI, all that stuff. And you mentioned kind of diversity, all that kind of issues. And the boomers are kind of out of the game, right? So, and you guys are holding in there, running things, which is great. But whatever these guys want to do, we're going to do. I mean, it's not going to be, these guys we're going to do. We're going to do these guys. Now, there is some moderation of political values over time, but mostly the views that you kind of hold in your first 3 elections historically have played out that you stick with that kind of framework of politics for your life. That's why you guys are generally a conservative generation. That was the Reagan revolution. You guys came of age in Reagan, and it was all good. And, that's kind of where you vote. Not everyone here. I don't know. I'm not going to go into it here. But I'm just saying, I'm just giving you the numbers. So if you just play out these 25 years, that's what we're doing. So, and I think our politics has not reflected this yet. We're still stuck in this thing that's a 50-50 game and all this stuff. The other thing that's not really come clear to everyone is both those generations, Gen Z and millennials, are 50-50 people of color and whites, roughly, just for all practical purposes. The intermarriage is just totally going rampant in this. And so ultimately, all Americans are going to be people of color in a few generations, almost, if you start thinking about it that way. So this is a crazy different shift. Now, it's coming because we've had 2 great booms. This is the late 19th century, early 20th century boom of immigration. This is the one that came here. This is, Reagan was all into this. This isn't one party letting the borders open up. No, it was a kind of American thing. We wanted a bunch of immigrants in here, and they're in. And so what's happening is as the percentage of people of color go up, the percentage of white people come down. We're on track for about 2045 to have whites will be a minority. This already happened 15 years ago in California. California is about 35% white right now. Awesome state. I love it. I'm never going to move. So it's not like the end of the world, like people are freaking out about it. Like, no, it's good. But anyhow, but here's what I just want to tell you, because you're going to be dependent a little bit on what comes out of government. And so what I'm going to say is there's 2 sides of American government. We've kind of lost track of this. There's kind of a conservative swings, and there's progressive swings. And, both are good. They're baked into the word. You can kind of see some of the ideas of, it's all good. We want to kind of go back to the basics, we want to renew ourselves, but we also want to sometimes be big leaps of progress and reinvent things and try new things. And American history just goes back and forth between these two. We've been in this 50-50 split, which is why nothing gets done, and we're in this crazy thing in Washington right now even. But here's the thing. All it takes is 10% of the people to shift, and you've got a different era. This is what happened the last 40 years. This is what happened. There were Democrats who were kind of playing within the conservative game. Anyhow, that's the way we ran the world. I'm telling you, that's the way it's going to go with these young people coming in. And in fact, so you got to start thinking about politics and what happened. It's much closer to what happened in the post-World War II boom, which is the last big progressive era. We call it liberal, but in historical terms, progressive is kind of, that was a one-time way of talking about liberals, but the progressive era in the early 20th century, anyhow, there's a different period. But this is kind of more egalitarian, more public investment, more kind of higher taxes, stuff like that. And there was plenty of growth and things happened. This is the kind of Reagan last 40 years, good things, entrepreneurial energy, kind of deregulate, a bunch of stuff, positive. I'm arguing that's over, and I think what you're moving into a different thing here. And this decade, this will get clear, and it's going to have implications for you. Probably higher, much more in regulations, much more government investment because of climate, much more higher taxes to pay for this stuff and deal with things. Even though it doesn't seem right when you, that's not what they're talking about today. I mean, that's the lag time in politics. I bet you that's going to happen. If not, maybe I'm wrong, but consider it. And I want to just finish here with a bigger picture of all of American history, which has been fascinating. American history has gone through essentially a reinvention, a transformation about every 40 years, since the beginning. Since the beginning. I mean, after there was the Revolutionary War period, total transformation of how we ran things. George Washington. Then there was a whole, and we don't have to go into the whole history, but essentially there's a backlash to that into more of a populist kind of Heartland kind of reaction. This is Andrew Jackson for those. Then there was, of course, a big fight over where the country is going, slave or free, but also all kinds of different things. The manufacturing economy. And then there was a period in the early 20th century, the progressive age. Teddy Roosevelt kicked it off. Woodrow Wilson kind of ended it with Democrats and Republicans, by the way, in that. The last big one we saw was FDR coming off the Great Depression, World War II. Then we saw, in terms of that, then we saw the Reagan thing. I just mentioned this. I'm saying we're in another one of these now. It's not the current cast necessarily, you know, who's running for president right now. I'm just not saying that. But I'm saying what's going to define this era is essentially a different kind of politics. Now, one thing to remember about this, every single one of these junctures was insanely polarized and paralyzed and violent. This one, 600,000 Americans died. This one in 1930s was craziness in terms of what was going on there. This was, you know, the 60s, all kinds of crazy stuff happened. Anyhow, these happen, and we always get through them. The other thing about it, both parties play a role in the new way forward. Both parties have been progressive at times and conservative at times. The Republicans now who call themselves conservatives, they were the progressive era. They were them. This was a progressive. Anyhow, the point is, this moves both ways. And I am saying we're in another one of those now. Now, the final thing to end up here, before we get to Q&A, and we're looking on track here with time, this isn't just happening in America, folks. This is happening all over the world. These world historical technologies are changing everything for everybody. So, wow, if we're going to let go of the oil in 25 years, what do you think Russia, which is a petrostate, is thinking? Or what do you think people that are all dependent on oil? They're not happy with that. Anyhow, there's many geopolitical implications of this, and they didn't want me to go into the geo, which I won't much, except to say that a lot of the turmoil you're watching around the world right now is essentially a reaction to these same giant forces, world historical forces. Just like in our country, they're playing out weirdly all over the place. I will say this, that America has been in a battle of democracies and non-democracies, but let's say autocracies, for its history. Like at the beginning, we were the only basic democracy, right? And what's interesting is every one of these junctures I mentioned, these big ones, the progressive era, we got more democracies in the world. This one, World War II, boom, a spike in democracies. This one, the 1980s kind of thing, fall of the Berlin Wall, boom, big thing. We're in this kind of battle, you could say. And this is what's also played out geopolitically right now. And there's a second front on this, which is in an age of superpowers like this, there's really only two players right now, and that's China and the United States. And they basically, China, I love this thing because they're centralized. We're kind of crazy, let a million followers, boom, and they each have their positives and negatives. But one thing we got to know is that here's a proxy for AI development, but this is superpowers, supercomputers. Basically, we used to dominate this. China's picked up in the last 10 years. Basically, now we're about 50-50 in the fastest computers, and this is the rest of the world right there. There is essentially a play going on in the tech, and ultimately, you're starting to see it geopolitically. And I would just say, again, for different audiences, I go into different things with this. But I think this will affect you guys. All business is going to, we have to dismantle all the supply chains. I mean, it's a lot of crazy stuff happening. So tune into that world event too. But I'm going to end here with saying, as I said in the beginning, I am confident that we are, in fact, despite all those challenges, moving into an era of great progress. I really believe we're watching this world rapidly break down and be kind of put in the past. I really believe we're watching this new world being born every day and taking more and more iterations. And I really think that people in 50, 100, 500 years from now, they're going to look back in this period of time and they're going to say, that's when the world entered the AI age. They took the step change into artificial intelligence and working with intelligent machines. They're going to say, that's when the world made the step change into clean energies. Where from that time over, they were able to kind of do crazy big things with energy, but not blow the planet to pieces. And they're going to say, that's when they finally figured out bioengineering, were able to create sustainable everything, biodegradable everything, and make it so it's all their products are much more in sync with nature. They set the foundation for our era. They set the foundation for what we did. They said, that was the time of the Great Progression. What a crazy time and an amazing time to have been alive. I wish I was there. And I just want to leave you with saying, you are here. We are here now. Make the most of this moment and have a great conference, too. Thank you. And here's, you can get more on me. And by the way, that Great Progression, those are my websites. But I'm writing up a lot of those events we're doing, and you can follow a lot of that and get videos of all those folks I talked about on my Substack world, too. We have time for some, I hit it pretty nailed it here. We have 15 minutes, or roughly 13 minutes, to do some conversation, asking for questions. And so there are people that have mics, and if people want to basically ask a question, there's a couple mics there. If people have ideas, questions, want to kind of challenge me, ask me a little bit more detail of your industry, however you want to do it. It's all good.
Peter, I got a question for you. So more and more Armanino...
Where are we here? Where is it?
Right here. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
So more and more Armanino is being considered a thought leader for our clients in the AI space, AI and automation, kind of both. And I think the question is, you heard Matt talk about our bedrock of best and only, not wanting to be in that sea of sameness. What do we need to do to stay ahead and seize that opportunity and not let the competition catch up to us?
Well, it's a little self-serving, but I would tell you, but I'll tell you, some of your folks have been coming to our events, because once they reached out to me to talk at this thing, I was doing these events, say, hey, come on and see it. So Mary's been there, several other people have come. I really think if you need to get your head into San Francisco right now. And again, I'm not saying this for kind of, whatever you want to call it, self-serving reasons. I mean, what's going on in San Francisco now is quite extraordinary. It really is. What's happening in this AI space is, I gave you a little flavor of what's happening, but also the bioengineering space and also the clean energy space, or even broader climate tech, which includes like foods and stuff. It's exploding right now. And so what this series I've been doing, The Great Progression, is not just about AI, but it's also about these other areas too. And my series is one of them that we're having, and it'll keep going through next year. But in some way, try to, I don't know who, maybe you have an office in the Bay Area, I don't know. But I mean, get more people into there. We do a lot of my company, Reinvent Futures. We take senior execs for 1 or 2 day immersions into San Francisco. We bring them to startups. We bring them together roundtables with kind of thought leaders in the space, or kind of other entrepreneurs, or OGs. They call them the old guard, the OGs. who have been through these booms and have kind of watching it with some of the people I was showing you here. Yeah, wrap your head around this. And it's moving so fast that if you think you're just reading the New York Times or something, you're not getting it. It's moving way faster than, I know that said, the media is trying to keep track of this thing. But I will say, if you want to really be thought leaders, you got to kind of make an investment in that and get there early.
Just to refresh your recollection, we're the largest California-based CPA. And
okay, there you go. Okay, sorry, I didn't.
We've been there a long time. We were founded in the Bay Area. We've been there 54 years.
Sorry,
that's all right, quite all right. So, but your point is well taken that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man's king. We got to continue to know more and be abreast of what's happening today, and a lot of that is happening in the Silicon Valley, including San Francisco. So, yeah,
totally right.
Who else? Raise your hand if you have another question, or here, Tony Clecadet has one here if we can bring him up.
Can someone give him the mic here? But yeah, I'm hearing you.
So you talk about electrification in transportation, and many of the big three have cited they'll stop making internal combustion sometime in the 2030s. What does that look like for that entire infrastructure? When you think about the oil and gas distributor, when you think about the C-store, when you think, I mean, how does the world scale infrastructurally to catch up to that? And is that timeline even reasonable?
Well, it's fascinating. I have been invited to do a lot of speaking to the legacy auto industry, weirdly. I literally just this week got off. I'm going to be doing a big keynote next year. And I did one for them early, basically about 18 months ago in the auto industry. Because they're trying to get insight. First of all, there's no resistance. I mean, 5 years ago there was resistance, but there's no resistance now. Now they're all just like, okay, we know the game's moving, we know the puck's moving. Like, how do we move to the puck? How do we get it done? But they're not entrepreneurial. They've been in the legacy industry for 100 years. I mean, that industry hasn't literally budged for literally 100 years. And so the dealers, they're like, well, what do you mean? Electric cars, they have no maintenance. I mean, I have an electric. I don't know how many people have electrics here. There's no maintenance. There's no. It's cheaper. I powered off my solar on my roof. I mean. So they're trying to figure out, well, where do we fit in this, and how do we, are we charging stations? Are we, anyhow, the whole thing's going on. So I'm kind of giving them parallels to the digital revolution days, where in the mid-90s, no one knew how, we said, well, at some point we're going to have wireless connections to these handheld phones that everyone will kind of be able to walk around and talk with high bandwidth. And this is the mid-90s, and they're like, what do you mean that? Who's going to do that? How are we ever going to figure that out? And it's kind of back to your North Star thing. It's once you make a tipping point in these technological revolutions, there's a new North Star. You say, oh, this is what we're doing. And there's a million entrepreneurs that just go, boom, boom, oh, there's the North Star. Oh, cool, I'm going to do it. And so you just get this crazy build-out. Now that was, you get some manias. The dot-com boom was an overbuilding of telecom things. But then we had all this great fiber optic cable everywhere. Everyone, the original builders went bust, but then we all took advantage of it, and that started YouTube and video moving around. And anyhow, it's this haphazard thing, but eventually everyone's walking around with these things. And I told the guys, who's going to fill up the charging stations? Well, I don't know. But did we know that AT&T and Verizon and blah, blah, blah was going to fill out the wireless thing? We could guess. Maybe they'd have a good shot at that. But anyhow, it's that moment. And so we're in that moment now, which again, and I love Matt's kind of opportunity. I'm just like, the opportunities here are just immense opportunities right now. These are world historical shifts. This is like, when there's been about 25 general purpose technologies in history, kind of what historians kind of sanctify as, the internal combustion engine, the printing press, that kind of level, electricity, the internet, personal computers. This is at those stages of kind of fundamental new technologies humans never could do before, and now we can do. And so what are we going to do with it? And who's going to lead the way on that? And who's going to make the most money on that, if you want to just be that level? But who's going to make the most good of it? Who's going to make the most impact on it? Who's going to really, do it best? And that's where the opportunity is, Ed. So my job is just to get the word out, get you excited about it, but also it's let a million flowers bloom and go get them, figure it out. We got a little more time here for a couple last questions, if we have some.
Yes.
Oh, here's one.
So I really appreciated your slide on the Excel apocalypse. That's something I've heard over and over again. I think with accountants being made obsolete by the varying technologies that have come out. I think especially with the continuing compression on talent and the appeal to other, like data analysis and different things we're getting for the people that have the accounting brain mindset, it's really important that we address, AI as an ally versus a reason to leave public accounting. So what would you say to help convince our rising stars and our leaders that the AI is in fact an ally and something that would encourage them to stay in public versus leave?
Leave your industry to go into AI or something? Is that what you're saying, or no?
Leave to go to other industries.
Oh, others too. Well, again, I don't know your industry super good well. And again, this is something, if I had a consulting project or something, I'd get into it. But off the top of my head, here's what I'd say, is this new environment is going to create the category of accounting and auditing and professional services, or however you want to describe what you do, is going to create some huge opportunities. And you could move into those opportunities and grow gangbusters and be challenged and have all kinds of fascinating things. But there will be a clearing out of, also certain firms that don't move and don't do and don't whatever. So it's kind of more of a lean in or lean out kind of way of happening. I would say, I gave you just off the top of my head, I've literally been reading articles where everyone's trying to figure out well, how would you audit LLMs, and how would you, anyhow, but there's just beginning to be these frontiers of your kind of brains of accounting and detail and, monitoring and reporting and all that stuff just has new ways to be applied in this space. And you know what? Maybe the tax returns are going to be done by, AI or some junior guys looking over a few kind of, the AIs, or maybe you're going to be able to do what you do in, half the time. And you'll be able to apply to new ideas of what your mindset can do to solve problems. One of the things that's just classic, and it's a great kind of line, all jobs is essentially solving problems. And the world has so many problems, it's like move the humans on to the next level of problems. And that is what the history of technology has been. Has always been, humans had to do a lot of things that were challenging and thoughtful at the time, but later became routine and dumb, and machines could do it. And now we move the humans to the next thing, and then we move the humans to the next thing. Well, just the point is that next thing is always the next level of problems, and we're not running out of problems. I just showed you climate change. Throw your head at climate change. It's like humans throw at that. That's not going to be AI, although that's going to help us. So I would say there's a lot of opportunities there. The other thing, I'll just give you one example, which I didn't tell you, which I'm looking here at the time. Which are still good. The coders, so the canary in the coal mine are coders, meaning software coders already who are now adapting to generative AI. I have coders tell me that they get many of them say they're twice as productive. Many say 3 to 5 times as productive. I have the founder and CEO of Chroma, which is a really interesting up-and-coming generative AI company. He said he can get about 5 times as productive using these essentially generative systems to kind of do the downstream coding that, in the old days, you'd have a creative idea and you'd have to start it, but then you got to just line up all the pieces and you got to do all the drudge work to get it all working, right? And now all that stuff is being able to be done by AI. So he has gone from what took him a week to do, it now takes him a day to do. Now you think about that productivity improvement, how that works maybe in your field or something. Again, these guys are the first to jump on it because they're coders, but that's a crazy, interesting thing. And he says he's got a company of 30 people. He said, we're all doing it. So his company that had 30 people is now doing 5 times as much work. Maybe not quite 5 because he's an extraordinary coder, but let's, doubling the amount of work or tripling the amount of work they're doing without hiring another person. So think about how you think about that. And, liberate your people who want to go to something else, liberate them from the drudge stuff, move on to the higher stuff, get them excited, hit the next wave of opportunities, and with the right people, they'll go, they'll stay.
All right.